My name is Cora. I'm 35 years old and I'm an interior designer living in Austin, Texas. If someone asked me what moment made my heart stop in the middle of luxury, it would be that fateful dinner at my husband's house. With the long table draped in white linen, flickering candles, and crystal glasses clinking amid cheerful laughter. Just as everyone was raising their glasses in celebration, my phone buzzed gently in my palm. A single text message from my mother sitting at the far end of the table with tense eyes. "Don't eat. Trust me." I froze. In a moment so subtle it barely registered, I looked down at the plate in front of me. Beneath the glossy sauce, a faint shimmer of powder caught the light. No one noticed. No one suspected a thing. But I knew something was there, something not meant to be swallowed. Seated next to me was Ethan, my husband, the man who once held my hand in the hospital when I lost our unborn child. Across from me was his mother, Marjorie, the woman whose smile was always gentle but cold as steel. And to my right, Kara, his ex-girlfriend, sitting there like she had never left. Have you ever been caught in a moment where your gut screams, they're trying to destroy you, right in the heart of your own family? If you've ever felt betrayed in the very place that was supposed to be your home, leave a comment below. Hit like and subscribe to follow the rest of this story. Because after that message, everything began to fall apart. And from that moment on, I started taking back everything they had stolen. I placed my phone face down on the table, trying to keep my fingers from trembling. Ethan's voice reached my ear, sounding far away. "Cora, aren't you going to eat? Mom made this just for you, your favorite." I looked up and forced a faint smile. I'm not feeling well. Maybe the smell is a bit strong. I placed a hand on my stomach, pretending nausea was creeping in. Marjorie blinked slowly, then tilted her head, her voice syrupy sweet. "Oh, darling Cora, are you still not fully recovered? It's only been 3 months. You need to be a little stronger. The women in this family are excellent at enduring." I clenched the napkin in my hand. She said, "The women in this family," like I had never truly belonged. Kara giggled beside Ethan, then reached over and took a bite from his plate. "Remember when we were in Santa Fe and ordered the same dish? You said it only tasted right when your mom made it." Marjorie chuckled softly, raising her wine glass. "Oh, Kara, you really do know how to keep memories alive." I looked around the table. Everyone here seemed to be playing a role on stage. Ethan, with his handsome face and just enough concern, looked at me like he hadn't once cried into my arms after every loss. Marjorie, revered by Austin's medical community, now sat there as if she had no part in whispering behind my back that I wasn't strong enough to be a mother. Kara didn't even hide her ambition. Every gesture, every word aimed straight at me, and Ethan let her act freely. I turned to my mother. She wasn't looking at me, but her lips were pressed tightly together, her eyes locked on my plate as if afraid that 1 second of distraction might let something spiral out of control. I carefully set my fork down on the plate, then bowed my head slightly. "Mom, I'm sorry. I feel a bit nauseous. I need to go to the bathroom." I didn't wait for a response. I stood up, gripping my small purse tightly. As I walked past my mother, I felt her hand squeeze mine under the table. A soft squeeze, but it nearly took the breath from my lungs. Inside the downstairs bathroom, I locked the door, opened my purse, and pulled out a small zip bag I kept with my makeup. Using a clean tissue, I quickly scooped a portion of food from the plate into the bag, wrapping it carefully in 2 layers of napkin. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear but from something breaking inside me, a fragile layer of trust in people I once called family. I sprayed perfume on my wrists, gently patted my cheeks, then returned to the table. Every eye turned toward me as if I were the weakest person in the room. Marjorie gave a reassuring smile. "Told you she's not ready. That loss. Such a shame." Kara looked me up and down. "Maybe Cora just needs more rest. Little getaway. Or maybe, take some time off work." I smiled lightly. "Thanks for the concern. But I'm still clear-headed enough to know when to step back, and when to stand tall." The meal ended in a strange atmosphere. Ethan tried to act normal, asking a few shallow questions before making an excuse to take me home early. I didn't protest. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. On the drive home, Ethan asked, Are you sure you're okay? Mom's just worried about you. She only wants you to be healthy. I turned my face toward the window. If she truly wanted me healthy, maybe she should stop inviting your ex to every family dinner. He didn't respond. We arrived home in silence. I went to the bedroom, locked the door, and called my mom. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I need to get something tested. Her voice trembled slightly. I noticed something strange too. I can't be sure, but the way she looked at you, it didn't seem like someone who wants to take care of her daughter-in-law. I put the zip bag in the fridge, labeling it with a note. Do not touch. Personal project. I didn't know how curious Ethan might be, but I needed to preserve it until Daniel could arrive. The private investigator I had once hired to vet a land deal before buying my first home. Before bed, I opened my laptop and logged into Ethan's email. We used to share passwords back when trust was easy. He hadn't changed it, or maybe he thought I wasn't smart enough to look. I found a recent chain of messages between him and Kara. She's weakening faster than I expected. Might be able to get her to sign before next month. Good. I don't want to wait anymore. That house has to be yours. Keep going. She suspects nothing. I stared at the screen, no longer feeling pain. Just emptiness. They had planned to take everything. My house, my assets, my name. Maybe they thought I'd been crushed completely by the miscarriage. But I was still here. And I had just found a reason to rise again. Not to reclaim love, but to demand justice for myself. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I had been awake for hours. I sat in my small kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to sip. In front of me was the zip bag from last night, placed carefully inside a small cooler box my mother brought at dawn. She said nothing when she handed it to me, just looked at me with eyes that needed no explanation. None was needed. Everything was clear. I called Daniel at 7 a.m. He accepted immediately. Bring the sample to my office. I'll get it tested right away. And if you agree, I'd like to expand the investigation. I agree, I said. I need to know everything. All they've done. At 10 o'clock, I arrived at Daniel's office. He was a middle-aged man with the hard lines of someone who had worked in law enforcement for years, but his voice was strangely gentle. He opened the door, welcomed me in without asking questions, and carefully took the sample from my hands, placing it into a secure container. I have access to a private lab. They're discreet. No questions asked. If anything's off, you'll know in 2 days. I sat down and handed him my phone. I also need you to look at this message thread. Daniel put on his glasses, scrolled through the screen, and nodded steadily. This is more than just marital betrayals. This looks like a planned property grab. If what I'm seeing is correct, Ethan and Kara aren't just colluding. They might be working with your mother-in-law. I gave a bitter laugh. You haven't heard the half of it. Kara is at my house more than I am. She has the key. One time I came home from work and found her watering the garden out back, wearing my apron, playing my music, barefoot on my rug. Daniel took notes, never looking up. Do you have security cameras in the house? I did, but Ethan changed the password 2 weeks ago. Do you still have your housing contract? There's the original and the prenuptial agreement too. But there's something strange. I recounted a clause in the prenuptial agreement I had never seen before. A new condition had appeared in the final version that had been filed. Any assets acquired during the marriage would belong solely to the signer unless there was a separate written agreement stating otherwise. That clause had my signature beneath it, but I had no memory of ever signing that version. Daniel stared at me for a long time. It's possible you were tricked into signing. If they forged medical records, they could have edited this contract too. I clenched my fist. The air around me felt heavier. Everything I thought I could rely on, everything I had worked to preserve. Maybe none of it had ever truly belonged to me. That noon I came home. Ethan wasn't there. On the table was lunch, already set, with a sticky note. Kara and I went shopping back before 4 o'clock. I quietly stepped into the bedroom. My closet had been disturbed. Kara's perfume lingered faintly in the air. I opened a drawer and checked my jewelry box. A commemorative necklace Ethan had given me on our wedding day was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling. It might have been a coincidence, but I no longer believed in coincidences. Since the loss of my child, they had begun eating away at my life, inch by inch. When I weakened, they moved in. When I fell, they built a new family in the shadows of mine. I turned on my laptop and logged into my personal bank account. 3 separate withdrawals in the past month, adding up to over $9,000, none of which I had made. I had set up alerts for any account activity, but the notification email had been changed to a different address, one I never authorized. I printed every transaction and organized them into a folder. I didn't feel pain anymore, only cold resolve. It was like every stone in my life was being deliberately thrown down in a calculated collapse. That afternoon, I went to a coffee shop near my building and asked my mother to meet me. I needed to talk. I needed to know if what she had seen the day before matched what I was starting to uncover. She arrived wearing a gray knit coat, clutching her purse so tightly her fingers turned pale. She sat down across from me without any of the usual pleasantries. She waited in silence. "Did you see Marjorie? Put anything on my plate?" I asked. She stayed quiet for a long moment. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where a young couple was pushing a stroller along the sidewalk. "When you got up to go to the restroom," she finally said slowly, "I saw her take a small packet from her coat pocket, open it, and tilt it quickly over your plate. It didn't look like seasoning. I used to be a nurse, Cora. I know how people hide medications. I can't say what it was, but the way she did it, it was chilling." I held her hand tightly. "I already sent a sample of the food for testing. If anything comes back abnormal, I'll go to the police." She looked at me, her eyes bloodshot. "I'm sorry I didn't stop you from marrying him sooner. I thought because he was educated, had money, he would treat you well." "I used to think so too," I whispered. We sat in silence. Outside, the wind brushed against the glass like time had momentarily stopped. After my mother left, I received a message from Daniel. "Preliminary tests show signs of a low-dose neurodisruptive agent in the food sample. We'll need more conclusive analysis, but this is no accident." I lowered my head to the table, not in panic but because I could finally see the whole picture. And I knew it was time to redraw my path with my own hands. That evening, darkness fell quickly. I didn't turn on the lights, just let the glow of the computer screen cast light across my face. The house was eerily quiet. Ethan wasn't home. Probably still enjoying the weekend with Kara, the one who makes him laugh, as my mother-in-law used to say. I sat in front of the laptop on the desk in the spare office. Ethan rarely locked it. I tried the old password again just to be sure. It was still his father's birthday. Predictable, lazy, arrogant. He never imagined I'd be clear-headed enough to try. The screen lit up. The inbox opened. A chill ran down my spine. Most emails had vague subject lines, just strings of initials between two people who once shared too much. I scrolled through a thread labeled R, short for reset, Ethan's term for wanting a clean slate when life got messy. In one message, Kara wrote, "She still doesn't get it?" I left the printouts right in front of her. Ethan replied, "She's disoriented. Doesn't trust herself. Almost there. Just need the signature. Once the transfer is done, the house is mine." I scrolled down, reading slowly. Each line was like a blade pressed deliberately into my skin. They talked about me like I was a project, something to be removed in the neatest, most lawful way possible. One email hit like a hammer. The night I brought flowers, she was really confused. "I think Mom adding a few more doses to her morning tea should do it. She's losing trust in her own senses." I stopped. My hands dropped to my lap. They were ice cold. I had suspected. I had felt it. But seeing my name written out in their plans to break me down, there's no way to prepare for that. I scrolled again and saw a message with an attachment. A PDF file. I opened it. It was a transfer of ownership contract. Our home. My signature was placed right beneath the clause. "I agree to relinquish full ownership rights of this property to the other party if found medically unfit as per professional evaluation." The signature matched mine. I studied every loop, every curve. Flawless. But I had never signed any document like that. The date underneath? 6 weeks ago. The same day I had recovered from that hospitalization for exhaustion. I sat up trying to remember that day. Ethan had brought tea into the room. I was still dazed, my head buzzing, my hands trembling. He placed a stack of papers on the table, just some insurance forms. I already filled them out for you. I had trusted him. I hadn't read every line. I had signed. I printed every incriminating email, gathered them into a file, then carefully pulled a USB drive from my drawer. I copied every file, every attachment, every line of correspondence they never thought I'd see. I locked the office, returned the laptop exactly as it was, placed everything back in its usual spot. Before leaving the room, I paused, looking around. This was no longer Ethan's office. It was a crime scene, a map of their attempt to erase me. Near midnight, Ethan came home. I lay still, pretending to be asleep. He entered the bedroom smelling faintly of alcohol and Kara's perfume. He climbed into bed, his arm draping over me like a lifeless habit. I kept my eyes closed, breathing steady, silent. But in my mind, the walls were collapsing. The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, laid out breakfast. Like any other day, Ethan sat down, opening the paper. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Better than usual," I answered. "I think I'm getting back to myself." He smiled. "That's what I've been hoping for." I looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I'm trying my best to put everything in order." He had no idea what I'd seen. He couldn't know that I wasn't the lost, confused woman they had tried to mold. I had been fragile. I had faltered. But now, every word, every gesture, every cup of tea placed in front of me was a stepping stone to something stronger. That afternoon, I met Daniel. I laid the stack of printed documents on the table. "This is the full exchange between them," I said. "And this is the contract I was tricked into signing." Daniel flipped through each page. His expression tightened. "Do you have the original copy?" "I don't have it, but I do have footage from that day." The living room camera was still running. I remember seeing Ethan place that stack of papers on the table. If we extract the right time frame, we might catch the moment I signed without any proper explanation. Daniel nodded. "If that's true, this isn't just asset fraud. This is legal document manipulation with intent to strip ownership, involving mental health elements. You're caught in a complex scheme, but you already have a substantial amount of evidence to go after them." I sat up straight, my voice steady. "I'm not looking for revenge. I just want everything brought to light." Daniel went quiet for a moment. "And do you have the strength to see this through?" I looked him in the eye without blinking. "I survived the worst. Whatever's left, I won't let it stay buried in the dark." He slipped the papers into a file folder, zipped it shut, and spoke almost in a whisper. "We'll go slow. No one suspects anything yet. And that's the only advantage they left you with." I left Daniel's office and stepped out under the crisp Texas sky, a light breeze sweeping through my hair. In my purse was a USB drive containing the whole truth. In my hand was a stack of documents proving I had been led into a filthy game. But in my heart was something they could never steal. My clarity had returned, and so had the will to reclaim every piece of what was mine. I sat motionless in my car for nearly 20 minutes after leaving Daniel Rhodes' office. My hands still clutched the steering wheel, but my mind drifted elsewhere. Someplace cold, dim, littered with broken pieces of memory I once believed were random. His warning echoed in my head. "You're not the first person to report the Marjorie family. I've tracked 3 other cases in the past 6 years. Young women married into successful families, provided for in every way. Then gradually, they disappeared." I asked, "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, the polite facade he wore earlier now gone. "They didn't die. But they were pulled out of their own lives. One woman lost custody of her children after being labeled mentally unstable. Another was placed in a care facility after a miscarriage, and never regained access to her bank accounts. They all have one thing in common. They're tied to Marjorie Parker." I sat in silence, my heart pounding harder with each beat. "And you, Cora," he continued, "you're showing all the signs of someone nearing the final stage. child removed, exhaustion, inconsistent medical records, emotional isolation, financial control slipping from your hands, and signs of low-dose poisoning to impair cognition. I don't remember exactly how I left his office. Everything felt wrapped in fog. But I do remember the chill crawling down my spine when I heard his last sentence. "You're next on the list." I got home under a gray sky. Kara was sitting on the back porch, sipping white wine, her legs casually crossed like she had lived here for a year. She turned when she heard the car, offering a smug smile. "Okra. Back sooner than I thought." I stepped out, gave a small nod, trying to keep my tone even. "I need a bit of rest. Got a bit of a headache." Kara shrugged, lifting her glass. "Must be the weather. It's been erratic lately." I walked inside without turning back. Every step on the wooden floor echoed like a ticking clock. This no longer felt like my home. Every wall, every framed photo whispered secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. Pulled out my phone and texted my mother. "Please don't call me for the next few hours. If there's an emergency, just send the letter X." Then I opened my personal laptop. In the anonymous inbox Daniel helped me set up was a new email. Subject line: Subject 4B Hospital Note 2015. I opened it. It was a scanned copy of a clinical note. Signed by Helen Brooks, MD, Psychiatry. The address was a small center on the outskirts of Houston. The note stated, "Female patient, age 25, experiencing insomnia, anxiety, mood swings, requires observation. Recommended 7-day admission for further assessment." I read it over and over. 25 years old. That was 2015 when I had just started my career. I hadn't even met Ethan yet. But my name, date of birth, and social security number matched exactly. I didn't shake because I was afraid. I shook because I realized someone had fabricated a piece of my past, not to help me heal but to set the stage for stealing my future from the shadows. I sent the file to Daniel. He called me back a few minutes later. "Cora, Helen Brooks used to work with Marjorie at a private facility. They have a history of collaboration in family psychological evaluations for the elite. I believe you're facing what might be a disguised medical intervention network used to legitimize control over women. Is there solid evidence?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Not yet. But if you're willing, I can connect you with an investigative journalist. She's written exposés on forced medical treatment used as leverage. You might find more than legal support, you might find truth." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Do it. As long as my identity stays confidential." "Absolutely," Daniel said. "And if you uncover any more documents, send them to me immediately. You're on the right path, but also stepping into ground they've protected at all costs." The night passed like a dream, skating on thin ice. Ethan didn't come home for dinner. Kara didn't enter the kitchen. I sat alone, dinner cold, soft light glowing across the table as if trying to reveal every secret hidden here. On the bookshelf behind me was our wedding album. I pulled it out and turned to the page I used to love. Me and Ethan under a white flower arch, sunlight streaming through my hair, a smile so genuine that now it felt like it belonged to someone else. I looked closely. In the background, behind the rows of chairs, a familiar face emerged. Helen Brooks. Not on the guest list. Had no personal connection to me. So why was she present on my wedding day? I snapped a photo and sent it to Daniel. He replied succinctly. "We need to talk, urgently. You're not a random target." I stared at my phone screen, the blue light casting a glow on my face. Every cell in my body was on high alert. The curtain had been pulled back just a little, and I could no longer look away. Because what I just saw might not only change my life, but also expose a system people had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. I began rearranging the house like I was building a stage for a play. But this time I wasn't a passive audience member anymore. I carefully picked locations to install small cameras. Devices discreet enough to blend into bookshelves, flower vases, even the back of the wall clock Ethan never paid attention to. No wires, no blinking lights. Just quiet witnesses, recording what Daniel and I had started to uncover. The truth. I kept my demeanor slow and soft. When Ethan asked how I felt, I answered gently in fragments. I moved like someone still tired slept more, or pretended to. When Kara boldly read on the living room sofa, I simply smiled, resigned. I let them believe I was slipping, losing my grip. That was the last role I was willing to play for people who thought they were smarter than me. 3 days later, Marjorie showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen pretending to make ginger tea for myself, when she walked in with the entitlement of someone who never knocks. Kara, I brought some pecan bars. Your favorite kind, she said, eyes narrowing as if searching my thoughts. I tilted my head slightly. You're so thoughtful. I haven't had much appetite lately. She set the tray down, removed her gloves, adjusted her hair, and opened her purse. I pretended to dry my hands, stepped away from the kitchen, just as the camera captured a direct view of the dining table. I stood behind the divider, holding my breath. Mrs. Marjorie took out a small bottle resembling a vitamin container, poured tea into a porcelain cup, and silently dropped in a few opaque white granules. Her face remained expressionless. Not a flicker of hesitation. She stirred it as casually as if adding a spoonful of sugar for her daughter-in-law. I stepped back in, wearing a calm expression. You make such good tea. I bet you used to be an excellent nurse. She chuckled softly, completely unbothered. Yes, but now I just want to care for my family. Especially you. I know recovery hasn't been easy after everything. I lifted the cup, let it touch my lips gently, then placed it back down, maintaining the appearance of politeness. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I looked straight at her. She didn't flinch. The confidence of someone who had done this more than once. When she left, I sent the video to Daniel that same afternoon. 3 hours later, my phone rang. His voice was dry but heavy with meaning. We have enough to build a case. But if you want to catch the others in the act, I recommend waiting a few more days. What you just sent, we're stepping outside the bounds of ordinary ethics now. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the kitchen, the same place where I used to peel apples for my husband, where I made hot cocoa every night he worked late. Now it was where Kara sat filing her nails and Marjorie walked in like she owned it. I understood that if I stopped here I could protect myself. But how many others wouldn't get the chance I had? I'm going forward, I said, until every one of them is exposed. That night I rewrote the entire plan. I taped a chart inside my closet door. On one side, dates. On the other, names, documents, actions. Ethan, Kara, Marjorie, Helen Brooks. I traced red lines between them like a web turned inside out. And at the center was me. Not trapped anymore, holding the scissors. 3 days later, Ethan invited me out to dinner. We need some time alone, he said. I think we should try to start over. At least give it a chance. I nodded. I could use a peaceful dinner. We went to a French restaurant downtown. I picked a table near the window, warm light softening the angles of his face, making him look familiar again. I had once loved those eyes, the way he tilted his head when he talked, those slender but warm hands. It was all still there. But now I saw a man playing the role of the perfect husband, while everything behind him had already collapsed. He took my hand. Kara, I know I messed up. But you have to understand, Kara was just a friend. And my mom, she's not as bad as you think. I looked into his eyes as if weighing a confession. I don't think your mother's a bad person. I think she's just used to controlling everything, including other people's emotions. He paused. What do you mean? I shook my head, smiling faintly. Nothing. Just thinking. Maybe I need to look at everything with a clearer mind. We finished dinner and he drove me home. On the way he asked, You still taking the sleeping pills? I replied, Not anymore. I've been sleeping quite well lately. Once home, while he was in the shower, I slipped into my office and opened my laptop. The footage from the 3 hidden cameras showed Kara clearly taking an envelope of cash from my desk drawer and sliding it into her handbag. An hour later, Marjorie entered, opened my laptop, inserted a small USB drive, and removed it after 45 seconds. I didn't know what they were searching for, but I had all the proof now. I sent the clips to Daniel with a note. They're snooping through my systems. They might suspect I'm onto them. Daniel called back within 5 minutes. You need to leave that house as soon as you can. We're taking everything to the district attorney's office on Monday. Keep everything secure until I tell you otherwise. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark room. The only sounds were the ticking clock and the soft blinking from the screen. Every step forward now could reshape my future. But I wasn't afraid. I felt clear. And I knew exactly who had been pulling the strings behind me. Their time was running out. It took me 2 days to prepare for that evening. Not because I wanted a perfect dinner, but because I knew every tiny detail might be the trap they'd walk right into. I cleaned every corner of the house, changed the tablecloth, picked the jasmine-scented candles Marjorie liked, just strong enough to make her feel at ease. I placed the main recording device inside the flower vase at the center of the table. 2 smaller ones were hidden in the chandelier and beneath Kara's chair. Everything was linked to an app on my phone. One tap and it would all start recording. Ethan was the first to respond to the invite, giving me a puzzled look but not declining. Kara replied with just one sentence. If you want to act civilized, I'm willing. Marjorie didn't answer immediately, but the next morning, I received a bouquet at my door. The card said only one line: family should know how to forgive. I smiled. They thought I was weak. They believed I was begging to reconnect. That only made them drop their guard further. That night, I wore a soft beige dress. Simple and elegant, nothing too striking. I had a chilled bottle of white wine ready, 3 kinds of cheese Marjorie once said reminded her of Paris, and the main course set. When the doorbell rang, I opened it with a warm smile, hiding everything that was churning beneath the surface. Cora, Marjorie said as she entered, her voice light. I'm glad you reached out. Kara followed, draped in a thin fur coat, eyes scanning the room like she was checking if anything had been moved from its rightful place. Ethan came last, one hand holding a bottle of wine, the other in his pocket. I'm surprised. But if you think this is how we heal, I support it. I smiled, inviting them to the table. They sat in the exact spots I had planned. The lights were set warm, soft music playing, enough to muffle background noise without interfering with the recording. We uncorked the wine. I poured for everyone. Kara lifted her glass first. To peace. I clinked mine gently. And to the truth. Marjorie gave a faint smile, though a tiny furrow formed between her brows. Dinner began with talk about work, health, small things anyone could share over a normal meal. I nodded, contributed, let them believe I'd softened. When dessert was served, almond cake I'd baked myself, I glanced at Marjorie and smiled easily. I remember you said you preferred homemade ones to store-bought. She took a sip of tea and set the cup down. You remembered. Actually, Cora, I've always believed in your potential. Though sometimes, you are a little too sensitive. I smiled softly, meeting her gaze. You really think so? Haven't I said it before? She replied, setting her spoon down. After the miscarriage, you were clearly weaker. I know it hurt. But a real mother must be stronger. I turned to Ethan. He said nothing, just stared into his wine glass as if everything happening was beyond his control. Kara leaned her chin on her hand and laughed. I remember back then he had to handle everything. And Cora? You were in the hospital for 3 straight weeks. What did the doctor say again? Severe signs of depression. I tilted my head. Good thing you were around to help. She smirked. I've always been good at filling in when someone falls short. I nodded slightly, like I was agreeing with a truth long accepted. You all thought I wasn't strong enough to be a mother, I said, my voice steady. Because I fell apart after a terrible loss. Because I needed time to recover. But has anyone ever asked, what exactly made me that weak? The 3 across from me froze for a moment. Ethan frowned. Kara set her glass down. Marjorie adjusted her posture. Cora, Ethan spoke, no need to bring up the past if you're trying to move forward. I smiled, picked up the bottle of wine and poured more into my glass. It's exactly because I'm moving forward that I need to see clearly what's behind me. Marjorie crossed her arms. Then say it. What are you implying? I leaned in, eyes locked on her. You're a smart woman. You understand clinical signs. You know exactly how a certain drug affects the nervous system when diluted in tea. Especially the tea you conveniently brew every time you visit me. Her face stayed calm, but her lips had stiffened. I turned to Ethan. Do you remember the day I signed that stack of insurance documents? You told me it was just a follow-up confirmation. But inside, there was a clause about transferring ownership. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Everything has been recorded. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table. Every word at this dinner. Every action in this house over the last 2 weeks. And the video from the camera when your mother slipped something into my tea. No one moved. Kara muttered, "You're paranoid." I turned to her. If I'm paranoid, then it's strange that the copy of the contract you're holding matches perfectly with the altered version in Ethan's email. Her face went pale. I stood gathering the empty plates. My voice stayed steady without a trace of strain. Thank you all for coming. Dinner was very useful. And don't worry, all the evidence has been backed up. So if I happen to disappear, the right people will still receive everything. Marjorie said nothing. Ethan lowered his head. Kara clutched her handbag strap. I smiled. Not the smile of someone victorious, but of someone who had broken free from the loop. They had seen me as a weak pawn. They didn't know it was their contempt that made me see each of them clearly. And now, every word they'd just spoken had turned into evidence strong enough to tear down the facade they'd built for years. I sat frozen at my desk, eyes fixed on the file Daniel had sent just an hour earlier. Outside, the sky was heavy. Rain slid slowly down the window, like a thin curtain over old memories. On the pale yellow page, one line stood out. Clinical evaluation, female patient. Cora Elise Bennett. Date of admission, August 14, 2015. Preliminary diagnosis. Severe anxiety disorder, loss of emotional control, needs monitoring. At the bottom, firm rounded strokes. Attending physician, Helen M. Brooks. I had never seen this document in any of my past treatments. I didn't even recall ever being at a place named in the header, Westbrook Behavioral Recovery Center. I flipped through page after page trying to connect the details, but it only made me feel as though I was standing between two lives that never intersected. In 2015, I had just started my first job at a design firm. It was also the year I got into a car accident while driving back home to visit my mother. I suffered a head injury and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. I remembered that clearly, or at least I thought I did. But in all the medical papers I'd ever seen, not once had there been mention of me being transferred to a psychiatric facility. I called my mother. She picked up after 3 rings. "Are you home?" "What's wrong, honey?" Her voice was cautious, as though she already knew what I was about to say. "Do you remember after the accident in 2015 was I taken anywhere else?" Silence on the other end. "Mom," I lowered my voice, "I just received a medical file with my name signed by Dr. Helen Brooks, dated that month. Did you know?" A faint sigh. "Yes." My heart skipped. I gripped the phone tighter, cold washing over me. "You never told me." "Why?" "I thought it was better if you forgot." I closed my eyes. "You had no right to erase my past." "I didn't erase it," she said quietly. "It's just, when you woke up after the accident you were frantic, disoriented. The doctor said it might be psychological trauma." I panicked. "I only wanted you to be taken care of properly." And Helen Brooks was Marjorie's friend. "How did you even meet her?" "A relative on your father's side once worked at the hospital where she consulted. They said Helen had experience with cases like yours. Back then I didn't know who Ethan was. I didn't know anyone. I just trusted." I couldn't blame her. Her voice was weary, remorseful. But her misplaced trust may have been the very first piece someone used to control me from the shadows. I never received a bill. No discharge papers. Everything disappeared as if it never happened. "And you never thought about it again?" "I thought you were fine. You went back to work. You never mentioned it." I was wrong. I didn't answer. Inside me was a hollow emptiness. Not anger, but the feeling of someone touching my memories without permission. Worse, they knew exactly what to erase and what to leave behind, to turn me into someone both fragile and easy to manipulate. I called Daniel right after. I think Helen Brooks reached me before I ever even knew Ethan. He wasn't surprised. We're reviewing her patient list over the past 10 years. There's a recurring pattern: short-term admissions not recorded in the national health system, but listed in the internal data of certain private clinics. Almost all were women with marriage records linked to influential families. I bit my lip. I'm just another piece in their network. You're the first to bring hard evidence forward. I sat down, picked up the red marker, and drew a line across the timeline on my wall for 2015. After the accident was a blank space. Faded memories. Unsteady emotions. I remembered turning down a promotion back then, saying I didn't feel stable enough. Now I knew the reason wasn't me. Someone had planted that doubt inside me. The next day I went to see my mother. She sat in the living room, clutching a cold teacup, her eyes aged further. I wasn't angry. I just needed her to listen. "Mom, I need you to do something. Write down everything you remember. About Helen, about that facility, who referred you, what you signed." She looked at me for a long time. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to bring it to light. Not just for me, but for the others who were erased from their own lives." She nodded, eyes brimming. "I'm ready." When I returned home, there was a thin envelope in my mailbox, no sender. Inside was a copy of an old photograph. Me in pale green patient clothes, sitting on a bench outside. Next to me, a woman in a white coat, hair neatly tied back. Helen. Her face wore a gentle smile that sent chills down my spine. I had no memory of that moment. No memory of ever sitting beside her. But the picture confirmed I had been there, and she knew exactly what she was doing. I sent the photo to Daniel. An hour later, he called back, his voice lower than usual. "We just verified it. The picture was taken at the Inpatient Recovery Wing, Section C of Westbrook. That facility never appeared in public records. It was a special recovery wing managed by an independent advisory group. Helen Brooks signed on as a supervisor there for 3 years." I set the phone down, exhaling. I was no longer a victim. I was living proof. And that made me a threat. But what I understood most was that what I thought I'd lost, memory, past clarity, had never truly left me. They had only been covered up. And now I was pulling each piece out of the fog. Not to be part of their game any longer, but to begin rewriting my own ending. That afternoon, I got a short call from Daniel. No preamble, no explanations, just 4 words. I found him. I went straight to his office. Daniel was waiting, a file tied with red string on his desk. He slid it toward me, his face hard as stone. "Arthur Bellman." I looked at the name on the file cover. Each letter carved across my memory like a knife. "Who is he?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses. "Lawyer. Officially retired 3 years ago. But in reality, he's still a private advisor for several powerful families in Texas, including Marjorie's." I turned the first page. A photograph of a legal document stared back at me. My marriage certificate with Ethan, attached to an additional clause, one I had never seen before the wedding. In stark black ink, it read, "In the event that one party is determined to have temporarily lost civil capacity, control of all assets will belong to the other party." Beneath it were 3 signatures. Mine, Ethan's, and the legal witness, Arthur Bellman. I whispered, "What did I sign?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You signed an agreement that had been prepared in advance, and Bellman was the architect. According to the records I found, he certified at least 8 contracts like this over the past 12 years. Every victim was a woman, married to an influential man, later diagnosed as mentally unstable at some point." I swallowed hard. Part of me had already suspected, but hearing it from someone else was different. The feeling that someone had drawn the map of my life before I ever set foot on it. It was bone-deep cold. "I was chosen," I said softly, "even before I knew who Ethan was." Daniel nodded. "And Helen Brooks was their card inside the medical field. Marjorie played the sweet bridge that pulled you in." I clenched my fist. "Were there others besides me?" "We've confirmed 3. One woman lost custody of her children because of a falsified psychiatric file. Another was forced into treatment and had to surrender her inheritance. And one lost all property rights when she signed a so-called temporary authorization right after a C-section. And all bore Bellman's certification. Daniel's voice lowered. I believe he's done much more than that. But no one has been clear-headed and brave enough to trace it from start to finish. You're the first to turn over the whole map. I leaned back. Not to rest, but to steady myself. A faint dizziness came and went. I was used to ugly truths by now. I asked, "What can I do?" Daniel replied, "You could file a complaint with the state bar, but it would take years and hit countless obstacles. Bellman has his own network, people who owe him their careers. But if you want to go further, I know someone who can help." I looked at him. Rachel Monroe. Independent investigative journalist. She exposed 2 similar cases in Florida. She won't hold back. I nodded. Contact her for me. Daniel picked up the phone without another word. By late afternoon, Rachel sent a message. "Meet me tonight. Private. No one can know." We met at a small cafe downtown, a place with no security cameras, the owner an acquaintance of hers. Rachel was a tall, slender woman with brown hair, eyes sharp as blades but a voice calm and steady, without the rush of someone chasing headlines. "What do you have for me?" Rachel asked as soon as she sat down. I handed her the folder. Everything on Helen Brooks, the marriage contract, Bellman, and the photo of me in the facility in 2015. Rachel flipped through page after page, scanning quickly without missing details. When she reached Arthur Bellman's name, she lingered. I've heard this name before. But no one ever brought me anything solid. I'll give you solid, I said. And not just for me. I believe there are other women who still don't know what's been stolen from them. Rachel studied me as if weighing every word for truth. Then she nodded. I'll investigate. But you need to understand, once I start, there's no turning back. Someone will watch you. Threatening messages will come. Are you ready for that? I answered without hesitation. I don't live in the dark anymore. They fear the light more than I do. Rachel smiled. Not the sympathetic kind, but the smile of someone who had stood in the mud and knew how to wade through. We left the cafe after dark. I drove home, my head still spinning. Not from fear, but from the sense that the net that once trapped me was finally revealing itself, thread by thread. When I got home, I opened my laptop and replayed the recording from the dinner days earlier. Marjorie's voice was crystal clear. Cora is too sensitive, too weak. She'll never be fit to be a mother. I saved the file to a separate drive, locked with 3 layers of passwords. I wasn't going to lose a single piece of evidence. Not now. Not when I finally knew who had built the cage. And, most importantly, who held the key. I stayed awake for many nights, spreading out every paper, every recording, every photo across my living room table. Everything cataloged, numbered, dated. They weren't just pieces of evidence anymore. They were answers to the hundreds of questions I had once tortured myself with. Why did I always feel something was wrong in my marriage? Why were my memories of 2015 always blurred like a dream unfinished? Now the pieces were connecting. I reprinted the emails between Ethan and Kara, highlighting the damning lines. She doesn't suspect a thing. Once she signs, everything will be easier. The date matched when I was still in the hospital, dazed with dizziness. I clipped the video of Marjorie dropping something into my tea, pausing at the frame where her hand froze above the pastry tray. I assembled the falsified medical file alongside the original handwritten by Dr. Helen, where she described my supposed psychiatric condition in 2015, even though that year I had been working full-time on a community project. I sent everything to Rachel on an encrypted hard drive. She called back almost instantly, her voice trembling with excitement. Cora, this isn't a personal case anymore. This is organized, systemic fraud. I didn't answer. I knew. Rachel worked like she had been waiting her whole life to write this series. Not just one article, but a 3-part investigation beginning with my case, then branching to 2 other women ensnared by Bellman's certifications, and finally the underground network between certain private medical facilities and high-ranking lawyers. The headline, Erased Records, Women Silenced in the Shadows of Power. The first piece was published Monday morning. That evening, the site had over 1 million visits. By the third day, Ethan Ward's name appeared on national television, not as a businessman, but as the husband of the woman who exposed a network that legalized abuse. The company where he was a development director announced his indefinite suspension pending internal investigation. A day later, Kara's accounts were frozen as authorities probed unexplained money transfers from dubious contracts. Marjorie, once walking proudly into parish council meetings, now faced the state medical board. A closed hearing was convened where the clips I had recorded were played. Her face, once the mask of compassion and grace, was projected on the screen, her eyes darting toward the pill bottle hidden under her handkerchief. I heard she fainted on the spot. But the most unhinged of them all was Bellman. The night the third article was released, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered without speaking. Cora. A man's voice, dry and brittle. I don't know what you're aiming for, but everything can stop here if you want. I sat in my office, soft yellow light shining on the stack of files on my desk. I'm aiming for the truth, I replied. His tone shifted. You don't understand who you're dragging into this. The people you think are allies could turn on you at any moment. I switched on the recorder. I understand perfectly. And I also understand that you're not afraid of the press. You're afraid of the law. I haven't broken any laws, he snapped back. I smiled faintly. Then would you like me to send the state attorney's office the transfer records from Geneva Bank, under the account Bellman Holding Group, to a medical facility in Kansas in 2015? Each payment labeled clearly, special personal treatment expenses, patient code 4537C. I was that patient, wasn't I? Silence on the other end. Then the line went dead. I closed my laptop. A gust of wind from the window scattered papers across the desk. I let them fall. I wasn't afraid anymore. The next day, Daniel called to tell me that Bellman had withdrawn all his money from Texas credit funds and was trying to bargain with investigators for immunity in exchange for cooperation. I said nothing. I didn't need him in prison. I only needed him stripped of his power to script false lives. Not for me, not for anyone else. Rachel appeared on national television as a guest on a special investigative segment. When the host asked why she was determined to pursue this case to the end, she answered simply, because there are women who have no voice. And because a woman named Cora showed me that if we are brave enough to remember the past, we can rewrite the future. I watched the program alone. The light in the room stayed on. I didn't need the dark anymore. I didn't need to pretend to be someone else, nor seek approval from those who once decided my entire life as if it were a page they had the right to erase. I stood outside the federal courthouse in Sacramento, golden sunlight soft over the granite steps. Behind me, a line of reporters, cameras, whispers. In front, the great steel doors where inside Arthur Bellman, the man who once steered my life with laws, seals, and shadowy transfers, awaited his preliminary hearing. Since Rachel's exposé went public, everything had unraveled like a chain reaction. The Justice Department formed a special task force to dismantle the network that exploited legal loopholes to manipulate medical files and contracts for profit. Bellman had nowhere left to hide. His accounts were frozen, his law office permanently shut down. But more importantly, dozens of hidden files surfaced. Women across different states who had been declared incapacitated or unfit without ever being given a chance to speak. In the expanded hearings that followed, one name kept resurfacing in testimonies: Marjorie Ward. She was arrested while trying to board a domestic flight out of California. A search of her home uncovered documents tied to insurance contracts, private correspondence between her and Helen Brooks, and a draft will she had altered, erasing my inheritance completely. Lab tests confirmed the substance found in my tea was a low-dose neurotoxic compound. Prolonged use would cause memory loss or behavioral damage. The official charges: conspiracy to cause deliberate harm and abuse of power to seize assets. Then he plummeted. After suspension, shareholders forced him to resign as director. At the press conference, the company's spokesperson repeated the phrase, due to severe ethical misconduct. He declined to comment. Days later, the media found him living in isolation in a small apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. Kara vanished entirely. Federal investigators issued a nationwide warrant for money laundering and complicity in financial fraud. All contact with her was severed. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only quiet. Like the surface of a lake after a storm, when the wind has died and the water lies still. When I was called as a witness at the official Bellman hearing, I hesitated. I thought I only wanted to reclaim my rights, not have anyone hear my story. But then I remembered the middle-aged woman who came to me after an interview. She cried, saying, "You spoke the words I never dared to." I understood then that my story was no longer just mine. I took the stand facing the judge, prosecutors, attorneys, nearly 100 people in the room. I didn't tremble. I spoke of the accident in 2015, of the memory loss I never knew how long had lasted, of the altered records, of the subtle control and the silence stretched nearly a decade. I spoke of the sweet trap of trust, of how a woman could be turned into a shadow of herself without anyone noticing. I presented evidence, recordings, videos, notarized contracts signed in forged ink. I wasn't testifying to accuse but to affirm that it had happened. That silence had killed me a little each day. And only by speaking had I truly lived again. The court deemed my testimony key in prosecuting Bellman. Marjorie was sentenced to 10 years in prison, Ethan barred for life from any financial governance. Kara was indicted in absentia, her warrant still active. I returned to my home in the Napa Valley suburbs on a crisp autumn morning. That house had once been the place I was forced to sign away ownership, the place I sat in darkness, afraid to trust anyone. But now I walked in as though for the first time it was truly mine. I dusted the photo frames, replaced the rugs, removed all the hidden cameras I had once planted. I didn't need surveillance anymore. I wasn't afraid anymore. In the living room, I hung a small wooden frame. Inside it, the court's certification recognizing me as a legal victim of psychological manipulation and asset seizure. The first case in the state ever prosecuted under that category. One afternoon, while cleaning out the old bookshelf, I found a cream-colored envelope, no sender name, only a careful inscription. To Cora, from the only sister who believed you. Inside was a small card. The handwriting shaky but clear. You didn't have to do all that you did. But you did. Not just for yourself but for hundreds of others. You saved more people than you realize. And I am proud to be the only one in the family who ever believed in you. Miriam. I sat quietly for a long time. Miriam, my sister-in-law who never spoke up while Marjorie pulled the strings, had been watching all along silently. I pressed the letter to my chest, holding on to the last piece of goodness left from a family that once tried to break me. I looked out the window. The trees were turning color. The air was cold but clean. I knew the road ahead was long, but I also knew I had regained my voice. And with that voice, I hadn't just saved myself. I had opened a path for others to step out of the shadows. Have you ever felt like the whole world had set a trap for you and only when you spoke up did everything truly begin to change? It took me many years to realize that sometimes silence isn't patience. It's suffocating yourself. But when I began to tell this story, I didn't just reclaim my dignity. I shook awake a system that had long buried truth under pretense and power. If you're hearing this and feel a part of it touches you, whether a vague memory, an unnamed pain, or simply the thought, "I've been deceived too," leave me a message. I want to hear you. Not because I need comfort, but because I believe when we start sharing, truth is no longer alone. Family can be the warmest place, but it can also be where the deepest wounds are cut. Complex ties, conversations left unspoken. They all deserve to be heard. If you find this story meaningful, follow this channel so you don't miss the others to come. Each one not just a tale told, but a mirror reflecting the hidden truths of family, love, and of ourselves.